Good morning, philosophers. How are you today? My day's been crazy so far. I guess I'll talk more about that later, maybe. All right, let's pick up with Socrates finishing his diatribe and Cebes intervening. Socrates, Cebes says, "Everything else you said is excellent, I think, but men find it very hard to believe what you said about the soul. They think that after it has left the body, it no longer exists anywhere, but that it is destroyed and dissolved on the day the man dies, as soon as it leaves the body, and that on leaving it, it is dispersed like breath or smoke, has flown away and gone, and is no longer anything anywhere. If indeed it gathered itself together and existed by itself and escaped those evils you were recently enumerating, there would then be much good hope, Socrates, that what you say is true. But to believe this requires a good deal of faith and persuasive argument. To believe that the soul still exists after a man has died and that it still possesses some capability and intelligence." "What you say is true, Cebes," Socrates said. "But what shall we do? Do you want to discuss whether this is likely to be true or not?" "Personally," said Cebes, "I should like to hear your opinion on the subject." "I do not think," said Socrates, "that anyone who heard me now, not even a comic poet, could say that I am babbling and discussing things that do not concern me, so we must examine the question thoroughly, if you think we should do so. Let us examine it in some such manner as this, whether the souls of men who have died exist in the underworld or not. We recall an ancient theory that souls arriving there come from here, and then again that they arrive here and are born here from the dead. If that is true, that the living come back from the dead, then surely our souls must exist there, for they could not come back if they did not exist. And this is a sufficient proof that these things are so if it truly appears that the living never come from any other source than from the dead. If this is not the case, we should need another argument." "Quite so," said Cebes. "Do not," he said, "confine yourself to humanity if you want to understand this more readily, but take all animals and all plants into account, and, in short, for all things which come to be. Let us see whether they come to be in this way, that is, from their opposites if they have such, as the beautiful is the opposite of the ugly, and the just of the unjust, and 1,000 other things of the kind. Let us examine whether those that have an opposite must necessarily come to be from their opposite and from nowhere else. As, for example, when something comes to be larger, it must necessarily become larger from having been smaller before." Sounds like we're about to engage in some word games. It's like when you use logic and pure reason detached from evidence, you can lead yourself in wild places. It's the difference between the validity of an argument and the soundness of an argument. Let's see. "Yes," said Cebes. "Then if something smaller comes to be, it will come from something larger before, which became smaller." "That is so," he said. "And the weaker comes to be from the stronger, and the swifter from the slower." "Certainly." Well, these words all indicate a change from one to the other, so of course that's the case, but the word dead does not indicate less alive. And the other complication with this is that, we're reading a translation from Latin, so I wonder what the connotations of the words we're reading were in that language. Could be different. "So, we have sufficiently established that all things come to be in this way, opposites from opposites?" "Certainly. I think that has been utterly failed to be established, but okay." Like, because something getting stronger comes from something that was weaker necessarily does not mean that something becoming alive came from something dead. I think you need some evidence for that. Anyway. "There is a further point, something such as this about these opposites. Between each of those pairs of opposites there are two processes. From the one to the other, and then again from the other to the first. Between the larger and the smaller there is an increase and decrease. And we call the one increasing and the other decreasing? Yes, he said. And so too there is a separation and combination, cooling and heating, and all such things, even if sometimes we do not have a name for the process. But in fact it must be everywhere that they come to be from one another, and that there is a process of becoming from each into the other. Assuredly, he said. Well then, is there an opposite to living, as sleeping is the opposite of being awake? Quite so, he said. What is it? Being dead, he said. Therefore, if these are opposites, they come to be from one another, and there are two processes of generation between the two. Of course. Man, this is just assumed. Why is this is not even valid logic, I don't believe. Words are subjective. Humans make up words as labels to apply to things. So you can't appeal to them as the objective reasoning for... You can't take the subjective usage of language and infer from that how reality works. That's non sequitur. Anyway, moving on. Let's see. Of course. I will tell you, said Socrates, one of the two pairs I was just talking about. The pair itself and the two processes. And you will tell me the other. I mean, to sleep and to be awake. To be awake comes from sleeping, and to sleep comes from being awake. Of the two processes, one is going to sleep, the other is waking up. Do you accept that or not? Certainly. You tell me in the same way about life and death. Do you not say that to be dead is the opposite of being alive? I do. And they come to be from one another? Yes. What comes to be from being alive? Being dead. And what comes to be from being dead? One must agree that it is being alive. Then, Cebes, living creatures and things come to be from the dead? So it appears, he said. Then our souls exist in the underworld. That seems likely. Then, in this case, one of the two processes of becoming is clear, for dying is clear enough, is it not? It certainly is. What shall we do then? Shall we not supply the opposite process of becoming? Is nature to be lame in this case, or must we provide a process of becoming opposite to dying? We surely must. And what is that? Coming to life again. Therefore, he said, if there is such a thing as coming to life again, it would be a process of coming from the dead to the living? Quite so. It is agreed between us, then, that the living come from the dead in this way no less than the dead from the living, and, if that is so, it seems to be a sufficient proof that the souls of the dead must be somewhere whence they can come back again. Man, it's just reading this book, I mean, it's good. It's good to read things that are wrong. It really is. It exercises your brain cells. And that is a lot of what this book entails. I think, Socrates, he said, that this follows from what we have agreed on. Consider in this way, Cebes, he said, that, as I think, we were not wrong to agree. If the two processes of becoming did not always balance each other as if they were going round in a circle, but generation proceeded from one point to its opposite in a straight line, and it did not turn back again to the other opposite, or take any turning, do you realize that all things would ultimately be in the same state, be affected in the same way, and cease to become? How do you mean? He said. It is not hard to understand what I mean. If, for example, there was such a process as going to sleep, but no corresponding process of waking up, you realize that in the end everything would show the story of indemption to have no meaning. There would be no point to it because everything would have the same experience, and he, and be asleep. And if everything were combined and nothing separated, the saying of Anaxagoras would soon be true, that all things were mixed together. In the same way, my dear Cebes, if everything that partakes of life were to die and remain in that state and not come to life again, would not everything ultimately have to be dead and nothing alive? Even if the living came from some other source, and all that lived died, how could all things avoid being absorbed in death? It could not be, Socrates, said Cebes, and I think what you say is altogether true. I think, Cebes, said he, that this is very definitely the case, and that we were not deceived when we agreed on this. Coming to life again in truth exists. The living come to be from the dead, and the souls of the dead exist. Furthermore, Socrates, Cebes rejoined, such is also the case if that theory is true, that you are accustomed to mention frequently, that for us learning is no other than recollection. According to this, we must at some previous time have learned what we now recollect. This is possible only if our soul existed somewhere before it took on this human shape. So, according to this theory too, the soul is likely to be something immortal. Cebes, Simmias interrupted, what are the proofs of this? Remind me, for I do not quite recall them at the moment. There is one excellent argument, said Cebes, namely that when men are interrogated in the right manner, they always give the right answer of their own accord. And they could not do this if they did not possess the knowledge and the right explanation inside them. Then, if one shows them a diagram or something else of that kind, this will show most clearly that such is the case. If this does not convince you, Simmias said Socrates, see whether you agree if we examine it in some such way as this. For do you doubt that what we call learning is recollection? It is not that I doubt, said Simmias, but I want to experience the very thing we are discussing, recollection. And from what Cebes undertook to say, I am now remembering and am pretty nearly convinced. Nevertheless, I should like to hear now the way you were intending to explain it. This way, he said. We surely agree that if anyone recollects anything, he must have known it before. Quite so. Do we not also agree that when knowledge comes to mind in this way, it is recollection? What way do I mean? Like this. When a man sees or hears or in some other way perceives one thing, and not only knows that thing, but also thinks of another thing of which the knowledge is not the same but different, are we not right to say that he recollects the second thing that comes to his mind? How do you mean? Things such as this. To know a man is surely a different knowledge from knowing a liar. And that's L-Y-R-E, not liar. Of course. Well, you know what happens to lovers. Whenever they see a lyre, a garment, or anything else that their beloved is accustomed to use, they know the lyre, and the image of the boy to whom it belongs comes into their mind. This is recollection, just as someone on seeing Simmias often recollects Cebes, and there are thousands of other such occurrences. Thousands indeed, said Simmias. Is this kind of thing not recollection of a kind, he said? Especially so when one experiences it about things that one had forgotten, because one had not seen them for some time? Quite so. Further, he said, can a man seeing the picture of a horse or a lyre recollect a man? Or seeing a picture of Simmias recollect Cebes? Certainly. Or seeing a picture of Simmias recollect Simmias himself? He certainly can. In all these cases, the recollection can be occasioned by things that are similar, but it can also be occasioned by things that are dissimilar. It can. When the recollection is caused by similar things, must one not of necessity also experience this? To consider whether the similarity to that which one recollects is deficient in any respect or complete. One must. Consider, he said, whether this is the case. We say that there is something that is equal. I do not mean a stick equal to a stick or a stone to a stone or anything of that kind, but something else beyond all these, the equal itself. Shall we say that this exists or not? Indeed we shall, by Zeus, said Simmias, most definitely. And do we know what this is? Certainly. Whew. Kind of feeling a little word salad-y. Talking about nonsense is what it seems like. My morning has been completely chaotic. A lot of my early routines were disrupted. A lot of my rules for myself did not go well this morning. I try and stay off my phone until after I'm done with this process. That didn't work because I've got people coming to the house to buy something I'm selling. There were multiple people coming. There's going to be some conflict between the people to see who gets here first, or a bidding war or something, and that's like taking over my brain space, messaging those people. I usually have a clear-headed morning. That is not happening today, so I need to kind of find a way to regain that. But this is my thought that I had written down for today, and this is from the book 48 Laws of Power, which I'm reading. It's like a manual for evil, power-hungry people. And like, if I were an evil, power-hungry person, this would be a very, very valuable book. Why am I reading it? Because it's useful. It's useful to know how to be bad. Why is it useful to know how to be bad? Multiple reasons. Number one, you'll know what to look for in your enemies or in bad people that you're dealing with. Two, because not everyone deserves you being good to them. The people that deserve you being good to them are the people that are good to you. And so, what's the saying Jordan Peterson talks about? Like, to be virtuous, you also have to have the capacity for violence, because you have to be holding that back. You have to be able to be bad when you need to be bad against other bad people. So, from that perspective, the book is interesting to read. Anyway, one of the thoughts from the book that I was thinking about is that it says, the summary is basically that honesty makes you easy to predict for your enemies. So I'll just read the quote. Honesty is actually a blunt instrument, which bloodies more than it cuts. Your honesty is likely to offend people. It is much more prudent to tailor your words, telling people what they want to hear rather than the coarse and ugly truth of what you feel or think. More important, by being unabashedly open, you make yourself so predictable and familiar that it is almost impossible to respect or fear you, and power will not accrue to a person who cannot inspire such emotion. Just interesting thoughts to think about. Who in your life deserves your respect and honesty and good dealings, and who does not? That's what I'm thinking about, for better or worse. All right, guys, have a great day. I'm going to go try and take control of this day back. All right, talk to you guys soon.